So this is the last section of film history that we're looking at for this. And what we're going to be looking at are kind of two sections. We're going to be looking at the Auteur Renaissance period, which is from 1968 to 1980, which auteur just means like author. In French, it's the idea of the director filmmaker as the author of film, and then New Hollywood from 1980 to present. And of course, we're not covering every possible aspect of this. We're looking more at kind of the key aspects of what you see transition in the New Hollywood period, of what becomes commonplace as one part of that, essentially, along with briefly independent film and then marketing we're going to look at as well. So first, looking at the Auteur Renaissance period, you have, let me get this up here. So you have the end of the voluntary rating system. And this is, remember we looked at before with, not the end of the voluntary, the end of the required production code to the new voluntary rating system. Sorry about that. It's not the end of the voluntary rating system. It's the end of the production code. So I'll put that correctly here. End of production code. Getting ahead of myself. And instead it changes to the voluntary rating system. And what this means is that there ends up being, well, it changes the look and sound of American cinema significantly, because you no longer have the strict regulations that they had to follow that really shaped a lot of films, because there were so many, I mean, we looked at that code, there were so many restrictions to what you could and could not do, or mostly what you could not do on film, that it funneled essentially movies into a kind of this narrow set of what was acceptable. And the voluntary rating system, right, you get a rating, that's what we have today on films, but you don't have the restrictions of what you can show. It just depends on what you choose to put in the film, then ends up influencing the rating, and of course then that dictates, often who will see it. It's one of the reasons when you look at, I think the one area where you can see where it guides people is that often studios will still try to have PG-13 over R in their ratings, because more people will see PG-13 movies, the families, children, things like that, than they will rated R. And so a lot of blockbuster movies, which we're going to look at in the second aspect of this, try to get the PG-13 rating and not the rated R. So it's not like the voluntary rating system doesn't shape some things, but not anywhere close to the extent of what the production code did. And it certainly opens up, if you don't care about, especially with the Auteur Renaissance period where that wasn't as much of an issue, or independent films where they're less looking for the blockbuster films, then it opens up an opportunity to explore and basically various themes that were not allowed before. So there was an increase in basically formally regulated themes, adult themes, basically sex, violence. We can put those there. So sex, violence, language, and violence could be like crime. There were tons for within sex, violence, relationships. You can put relationships here too. Right, those were kind of the big ones. That, of course, it could cover any of this aspect, but the idea of exploring criminality, sexuality, those things weren't allowed before, and now they could be. So it opened up a lot for the studios, for the directors, and this coincides, the Auteur period, with really what was important social and political changes during this period in history. You have, and one of them you could put for sure is the end of World War II if you go back a little bit before the time period of what that brought. And you do see a lot of films starting from this point, and I would say are still popular to this day, with exploring World War II more than any other period of war film. And in part, that's because of the Holocaust, the atrocities of World War II. Also, when it looks to American film, the benefit of having an easy narrative of the good guys versus the bad guys, which you like when we explore Vietnam War, which is another one of these political changes and social changes during this period in time. That wasn't clear cut, right? So World War II films are interesting because you have almost as soon as the war ended, you have some documentaries that come in and look at the Holocaust and that end result of Hitler. And then you have films that just are pretty much continuous throughout until present day of various types of styles of World War II films. And again, that's in part because they can be both independent films, they could be documentaries, they could be blockbuster films, because they fit into that kind of narrative as well. So you had that, where people were exploring that. But then you also have the Vietnam War. We'll stick with the wars first. And that was not as clear-cut, and there was a lot more, of course, with the Vietnam War of protests and unclear purpose for the war. I mean, it was connected to communism and stuff like that, but as far as many people questioning, why are we doing this, right? There wasn't a question at the end of World War II why we fought in World War II. There was questions to why we fought in the Vietnam War, not even with understanding the whole idea of the fear of communism and having the political policies to go and try to prevent the spread of communism. Many rejected that, and that gets into riots and protests. That gets into anti-American, anti-war sentiment that wasn't present before. And so this is also going to draw people and being interested in challenging kind of the status quo during this period, more than in we'll see like the new Hollywood period. And then of course you have the election of Richard Nixon, which then you could argue so the end of Richard Nixon for politics. And then you also have two major political assassinations. I'd say political figures, and with these figures, assassinations, and that would be Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy. And of course, this was connected with Martin Luther King Jr. With basically the civil rights movement, and more emphasis on race in movies. One of the things that's definitely clear is in like the 50s, the classical Hollywood period. There were two things that took place. One was that it was either just devoid of any diversity and an entirely white cast, or you had a lot of the time, if there was depictions of largely of black men and women, but other races in general, it was with very extremely racist portrayals. Blackface was also commonly used in the earlier periods of like the 20s and 30s. Blackface was incredibly common. And so with the advent of the civil rights movement, and even then the political assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., there is a shift in viewing race in films, creating more diversity in films, and examining and exploring that era, or that, not that era, but that topic as well, that wasn't present, or really probably would have even been allowed in previous films, even though the production code didn't particularly specifically address that, right? The only way that it was allowed was in ways that were racist portrayals. Birth of the Nation was incredibly racist and pro antebellum South. Same with Gone with the Wind was pro antebellum South. So it was a very one-sided view, and this opened up, and then Robert Kennedy. So you have these two assassinations that take place during this time. This encouraged just, like I said, continued kind of exploration of new ideas, new themes, new topics. There also was an interest in kind of with all this social change, turning to new young directors instead of older directors. And the new young directors were had explored and studied in a different manner than past directors. In part, I mean, you actually have a film industry now, or earliest directors, right? They were just winging it, but you actually have established film schools where many of these upcoming young directors were studied at. And you have where they're learning production technique and various skills with filming. They learned film history and theory, right? So it just adds to essentially, we'll just say new technology and training. It leads to a different way of approaching making a film than those who had not, that this really wasn't available before. And this also leads to, and why it's called Auteur Renaissance is because with these new directors, there was an emphasis on their skill and creativity. The idea was that what had moved away in the classical Hollywood part of this was the importance of the director, and it was to focus on the stars. During this Auteur Renaissance period, the directors became important again. It's a small period in time, but it is there where there was more focus, and not just that they became important, but that they were encouraged they were given a lot of freedom to do what they wanted. The two most probably well known were Francis Ford Coppola and then Martin Scorsese. There are others, of course, but these are probably the two heavy hitters in terms of new style, of being known, and kind of what they produce. The idea again was that they put on their artistic signature, that they you had they were commercial Hollywood genre films, but you now had this artistic flair with director style that could be kind of identified, that was known. The director's name was largely put in the title so that people knew it was by this director. Movie stars wanted to work with specific directors because of that knowledge and whatever style that they became famous for in that sense. So if I should have probably just put them one after the other. We'll start with Francis Coppola there. He did The Godfather, which probably the most well-known, but also Apocalypse Now. And Bram Stoker's Dracula. He did lots of others too. These are just some of them. As far as style goes, let's put here style. Some of the characteristics, and again, this doesn't cover everything. But theatrical, mise en scene. Oops. He also had a lot of focus on lighting, which was an important part of that. Set pieces, basically stagey set pieces, long takes that were connected often to the set pieces, that how the set pieces were framed. You could do long takes. Also, a focus on the narrative aspect was on a family melodrama. And again, this is not all inclusive of all of his films by any means. And those are the big ones here. And then if we look at Martin Scorsese, let's put a line here for him. Blue style for Scorsese. He was lots of moving camera. The camera's constantly moving. Also, long tracking shots. So, like like a main character will walk around, and this long twisted walk, and the film's following them the whole way. The freeze frame was also used, not on everything, but it was used a lot, where like it introduced a character, so they'd be filming, and then it would freeze on the character, and the narrator would be like, "That's me," right? That type of thing. Use of complex voiceover. Again, that's kind of with the narrator. So, you may be thinking this film's about whatever, but no, this is my story. I'm going to tell you about it, and it would go with the freeze frame of stuff. Use of popular music in movies, and also had to the narrative focused on often on moral and spiritual questions, and again, not always. This is just some of those characters, but the idea that you can identify, right, and say, here's a list of this director, and some would argue that you can't, that the Martin Scorsese, for example, that there isn't a way to identify fully his style. He didn't have a set style, and I would argue that none of them had like just one thing they did. That's what made them actually more of the auteur director, because they were creative with things, because they tried new things, but that you do see these repeating things in a lot of their films, even if some of their films don't have them. We can look at real quick here. We go to, here's this is with The Godfather, and then here's the movie poster for The Godfather. And The Godfather was definitely one of those where it was such a big success that it encouraged movie theaters to chase those larger blockbuster films. And there is definitely still like filmmakers, like you think of like Spielberg, that like is well known as a director, and that was used to bring in the audience and stuff like that. So it's not like after the auteur period that the directors went away. It's just that the Hollywood's going to shift their focus some because of this. And then here's the one for Apocalypse Now. And then you have Martin Scorsese and some of his films that he did. And again, it's not all of them. Casino, Taxi Driver. He likes to use Leonardo DiCaprio in a lot of his films. And Robert De Niro. I think those are the two most used actors. That could be one of the things you put on the list too, is that like repeat use of preferred actors. Martin Scorsese definitely had his favorites, and they get used over and over again in films. But yeah, so this period of where these directors grew up allowed them to be more artistic, to be authors of the movies, to explore and play in a way that films had not been allowed to do before. But with that success, you do have the transition to New Hollywood that emerges both in combination of becoming a larger corporation and I think just chasing blockbusters, chasing money, and wanting to produce what is going to provide the most audience and the most money for the studios themselves. So one of the things that does change, political changes that impacts corporations and business and makes some of these changes with this, is that you have the 1980s election, and the person who is elected is Ronald Reagan, who was a former Screen Actors Guild president and actor, and he focused on, let's put it here, this idea of the federal government moving away from special interest groups, and also the idea of what he called kind of freeing the American people from big government. So it's the end of big government, we'll call it. And what this really means is the idea of policies, regulations, etc. Now, how this is connected to film is that you basically have a deregulation of big business, with less rules and regulations that the corporations have to follow. So what it ultimately creates is large conglomerates and corporations. And this ultimately means that, I mean, the idea that in the film industry, studios can create monopolies. And as they get larger and larger, this allows them to essentially stop worrying about any kind of mark on, like with the auteur period of directors or style, and just focus on mass production. I mean, this kind of, it becomes their goal. Although, again, it won't be the only thing they do. But that's the big focus of movies, the big blockbuster. I mean, what this is the oops, moved it. Big blockbuster films. And you know, it's not the studio era that we looked at before, but it reminds me of kind of a return to that in some ways, because of the ability to become these mass monopolies and corporations that are just giants. I mean, we still have that today. That's a byproduct of today with, you know, think about, we looked at that before, this small number of studios controlling not just their studio, but all of these umbrella companies. Or think about like how much Google and Amazon control, right? That's that idea. And when you control that much, you don't have to look for creativity. You don't have to find something unique in the same way, because you have and the reason also the big blockbuster is because of massive amounts of money to be able to spend on these massive blockbusters. So all of that leads to this development. So let's look at the style of New Hollywood. And again, there are lots of other smaller styles of things that we're not going to get into with this one, but we're going to look at kind of the main one that emerges out of this. So one is that it does create the formulaic blockbuster films, because that becomes the moneymaker for these studios. The idea was, of course, to go back to entertainment over, you know, more in-depth what, thinking pieces. I don't want it to sound like it's bashing on the popular films. We're, we'll look at superheroes and other things like that. Independence Day, which how many look at. Uh, it's the idea though was definitely a shift from let's experiment, let's be creative, let's allow the directors the freedom to explore experimental films, and instead let's focus on a formula that works, and we're going to repeat it over and over again. And you see this, right? We'll skip ahead here for a second. If we skip to Marvel Studios, right, and the superhero films, these are, here's like, just to show you how many. These are extremely popular. These are big blockbuster films, and they make a ton of money. It also is super formulaic. The technology is cool. There's lots of development in CGI, in the story, but they all kind of follow similar formulaic structure, and they make so many of these because they work, because they're popular, because they entertain, and because people pay to see them, and they make the studios a ton of money. You also see this in a lot of films where like they remake the films. That's this period too, because there is this goes to the idea of not pushing the envelope. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? Is that saying? If it's working, then keep doing it. Rinse and repeat, right? This is working, so we'll do that. Okay, we've done a bunch of this same style. What else can we do? Well, this movie was popular in the past. Let's remake it. And so remakes of here, where we can put that, right? So that you have one is going to be action or spectacle, or what they call thrill movies, which that's definitely the superhero genre, right? We can put superhero, becomes popular with that, but you also have remakes and also adaptations of popular TV shows. And part of this is definitely this fear of pushing the buttons on things when they found a formula that works and they want to stick to it. But so action adventure becomes the main genre. Obviously, there are lots of other genres, and there are obviously films that are outside of this. This one just is the main genre because it was popular with the masses, and it made a lot of money. And so they serialized and the other one was also a shift to having trilogies. And trilogies were popular because, of course, by having more than one film and having a series, it was a guaranteed set of 3. If the first one was successful, it was almost a guarantee that the next 2 would be able to ride that coattails of the first one, even if they weren't as popular as the first. And the reason for all of this was that, blockbusters earned the studios a lot of money. And so what you do with this is you take fewer risks in the process. They also, there's several things with it. They also produce less, we'll say, blockbuster films. And what I mean by that, it's obviously more blockbuster films, but like the studios you would have a few large scale blockbuster productions. And the reason for this is because these movies cost a ton of money. These were extremely expensive to produce. And you do have to, films, when you look at like the classical Hollywood era where they were putting out, 35, 40 movies a week or a month or whatever, or a year, I don't know, it was a lot. Not a week, a month, a year, I think it was. They're producing massive amounts of films all the time. This was like a month. And they weren't expensive to produce. Now you have the films cost a lot more money to produce. They're also making a lot more money, by the way. So it's not like it's just costing more money. They're making it. You move into, by like 2010, studios had like 10 billion in domestic box office sales. So it's a massive skyrocket of money made on these, but they're extremely expensive to make. The production time, the CGI, the actors, they are huge films to produce. Like that became part of it as well. As it was everything about production is large scale, which is part of the reason why it's so expensive. So what they do is they produce a handful of extremely expensive releases every year in order to stay profitable, right? And then these emphasize, we can put, we'll put it here with this. So there was specific things that a lot of these blockbusters emphasize, which is, of course, the action and spectacle. And what I mean by that, think about Independence Day, right? And the explosions, the alien ship, the destruction. And destruction, you say action, that covers a ton of different things. Destruction movies became very popular for a while after Independence Day, right? That's a spectacle. The spectacle isn't meant to be like a bad word in this sense. It's a production of this massive spectacle of visual senses. You're being splashed with all these visual senses of what's going on in these scenes. They're huge action scenes, huge destruction scenes, huge events and stages and set designs and filming on location. Everything is massive. That's what spectacle means in that sense. Star power became very important over the director. Again, there were still certain directors that held sway, but more and more, what was more important was who was in the film than the directors in that short period of the auteur renaissance, where the director was more important. So we just kind of went back and forth, right? Because you have like silent film directors. There was the stars that were often the directors, and directors were really important. And then it moved to the classical Hollywood period with the stars being the center of everything. And then it moved again to attempt to looking more at the directors, and then right back to the stars. So we just kind of go in this up and down fashion of how things go. You also have massive advertising. And this was because, of course, the cost of producing these required mass marketing to make sure you brought in the audience and the money to be successful with having large audiences. These were kind of what big budget blockbuster films relied on in order to be successful. And with this was supplemented, and we're going to look at marketing in just a second. It's not wanting to move now. Let's see if I can get it up. There you go. This was connected with, we'll put this as a C, I think, independent films. And these go together. So that they're really like a pair here. Essentially, studios would supplement their blockbuster films with independent films. And the reason for this was that they had smaller budgets. So they were not as expensive to make. You usually had, what would happen is you'd have independent studios that cooperated with the larger studios as kind of an investor or supporter of it. And these were low risk, right? You didn't want to look like you were only producing 2 films in a year. So you had your massive blockbusters, and then you had a bunch of independent, smaller films and some weren't even independent. Like, for example, Kill Bill is a good example of one that appears like it's an independent film, and it's not. But so either it is actually independent films or ones that appear as independent films but are totally all, like, say they're all backed by these larger studios in some way or another, or directly produced by larger studios made to look like independent films, but all of them tend to have smaller budgets. And the idea is that these are the ones that are like the filler for the large blockbuster because it's lower risk. If they're low risk, high reward. If they're successful, these films can make the studios a ton of money. If it fails, you didn't lose too much money, right? And so these are great in between films in the process. These tend to have, with this, we'll actually put this as 2, with style. There is often a different type of style with these kind of independent film structures. So there's a larger emphasis on quality acting. And it's not that the larger blockbusters didn't have good acting, but almost this idea of, like, even movie stars treated as this, right? That, like, they might do the commercial blockbuster films, but then for their passion project is these smaller ones because it challenges their acting chops, right? It's a larger breadth of character for the actor. There's an emphasis on directing, right? And the director of these independent films. So you go back to still having that, right? They didn't get rid of it completely. The importance of screenwriting and, you know, the dialogue and all aspects of that. And just the idea of creativity and innovation. These are essentially where it allowed films to be kind of that experimental films that the blockbusters didn't get to be. These very much rely on critical praise for their marketing and niche marketing, right? They don't spend the mass amounts of money or diversity of marketing that the blockbusters get. And this is how they garner an audience with this, right? But then all of this then allows them to have minimal losses, potentially high reward. You can sponsor dozens of these productions while also having your high stakes ones where you have a few of those in the process. All right, now we're going to look at marketing. Oh, and then I think the only one I had in here for a large budget was just to show, like, Independence Day. But even, like, look at and this goes into marketing too. Oh, I did have Star Wars too, right? But think about these films, right? You have the superhero films, the Star Wars, which wasn't a remake, but it was a continuation from older films. Independence Day. All of these are action-packed films. It's not an emphasis on dialogue or that. Of course, you have comedies. Comedies are still popular. Romantic comedies are still popular. But the massive, the romantic comedies are never like massive blockbusters. These big, huge films, and they get coincided with. I mean, look at even the idea of the poster, right? The idea that the alien ship is taking up almost the entirety of the poster. It's just meant to look massive in both the film itself and the poster that they did. One-liners are a big part of the blockbusters as well, which goes into marketing too. But this idea of you want to have these clever one-liners that people are going to remember, because then you can market that as well. So that all becomes part of that. And an important part of success of films, right? This, like, marketing was an essential aspect and still is an essential aspect of the success of films. And I would say it's just changed significantly over time on how they did that. There were traditionally three main types of marketing, film marketing. And those were like free publicity, I can say that word, free publicity, paid advertising, and then tie-ins and merchandising. But there's definitely two sections to this. Let's put here, we'll do pre-internet marketing and then internet marketing, which with the whole point of the Blair Witch Project is to show how the internet changed marketing of films. So if we look at an example with pre-internet marketing, we can look at Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park was definitely one of those massive blockbusters. 1993, pre-internet marketing. So the first part you have is with free media publicity, which could include reports and articles and things like that, things that were written about the film. And these were the topics. So here is where the director was important for the media. Spielberg, there was stuff that was written about the making of the film and special effects, because, well, the special effects were like groundbreaking at this. There's also the groundbreaking idea, not CGI, not computer based, but like he built basically some of parts of these dinosaurs, right? The idea was having these actual props of dinosaurs for the movie to make it look realistic. But the special effects for that were amazing. And then, of course, bringing them to life. The premiere, that's a reason of why actors are still contractually obligated to go on press tours and show up for premieres. Genetic engineering became a topic during this time because of the content of Jurassic Park. And then what was kind of called dinomania at the time, a huge shift in interest in dinosaurs. And all of this stuff that was being written was connecting to the film Jurassic Park. So they may focus more on genetic engineering, like, hey, watching Jurassic Park, this made us think about genetic engineering. And then they go off on the article about genetic engineering. But the whole point was that people are drawn to it because it mentions Jurassic Park as that tie-in to that in these articles and stories. And then you have, this is a huge part of this one, pre-internet, you had to have a lot more paid advertising. We're gonna see how the internet changes that a lot. I mean, even the Blair Witch Project, Paranormal Activity are two great examples of how you don't have to have a ton of money once you have the internet. But before that, you definitely have a lot more that you have to do to get it out there to people. So of course, TV, radio, billboards, newspapers and magazines, right? This is how you got information to people, to read about it, to see it, to hear about it. All of that costs money. And then there was always a huge TV blitz, and the same for Jurassic Park, the week before the movie came out and the week of the premiere, of opening of that way you try to get the most people in that process. And then for tie-ins, and we'll separate tie-ins. We'll say tie-ins and merchandising, right? So this is toys and other things like that. The tie-ins, though, are McDonald's was huge. So this was expensive. This was a multi-million-dollar tie-in with McDonald's. They also did hotels. Select hotels had deals with things that you got, or having the Jurassic Park experience. Let's look at those. Okay, so let's go look at the McDonald's marketing that took place. Okay, so McDonald's did these drink cups. They actually started it with Batman, and this was the second round of these. But right, the idea, collect all 6. So of course the tie-ins are meant to not only promote the movie, but of course it promotes McDonald's as well. McDonald's was the tie-in to have because they were the biggest fast food company out there, and people would pay to collect, to track down and collect all 6 cups. And then you had the shirts that of course they got, that the workers got. Have you dino-sized today, right? Rather than super-sized, have you dino-sized? They had pins that went with it. This one, they did, this was the merchandise. There was stuff with McDonald's, but then it was also, this was part of the merchandise stuff. So I guess I'll finish writing the merchandise stuff that they did. But this was, the McDonald's stuff was definitely huge. Anytime you get any kind of time, and this still happens today, right? When new, especially for kids stuff. So that's a change from if you're looking at the 80s and 90s, early 2000 to today. Most of the tie-ins for fast food restaurants, specifically McDonald's, which is the one that does it the most, are going to be kids movies now. Because but I remember Dairy Queen did tie-ins. They could get glasses, you could get there too. Glasses just became, cups and glasses became this popular thing for a while, and it wasn't just for kids, it was for adults. And you still have some movies that have that on their cups. Of course, they're not these plastic cups you can keep and reuse anymore. They tend to just be on their regular paper cups. But the larger marketing with tie-ins for fast food like McDonald's tend to go to kids movies now, because they can put those toys in the kids meals. Pokemon is what the most current one at McDonald's is right now at this point in time, right? So there's still obviously tie-ins and stuff that hasn't changed because of the internet. Just I think the target audience has shifted more towards children. And less away from everyone and adults being included in this process. So the merchandising component was, well, you had a press packet that had a lot of freebies and stuff to get them excited. So they would, and that kind of goes back then to free publicity, right? You spend some money and merchandise to give to the press so that they will give free publicity to it. They made holographic watches. They had those pens and stuff. Those were connected also to the hotel. Pinball machines that they made for this. They made socks and briefs, underwear and stuff for it. Why that was probably Christmas cards. And then, of course, all manner of toys. And this one is later where you get a lot of your money from that. So we look at some of the other stuff here. These were ads for shirts, for toys, for cards. They made, here, look, you could buy Topps Jurassic Park cards and collect the whole series, right? So you have, and then of course, just like I said, the various toys and stuff for kids. Toys are still done today for films. Again, more for kids than anyone else, obviously, because it's toys. You still have collector items for other stuff. It's not, again, none of this stuff went away. It just, studios are going to start spending less money on this aspect of marketing as it shifts with the internet, because you can be more effective and pay less for other types of marketing that I really would argue are more impactful today. And the best example of this is the Blair Witch Project. So, and I'm not going to get too much into this since we're having you do your own research on this. But the Blair Witch Project, so we're going to talk more, I'm going to write more about the Paranormal Activity in just a minute of what they did, because, and hopefully you'll see the connection with Paranormal Activity and how they definitely were influenced by the Blair Witch Project. The Blair Witch Project was one of the most brilliant marketing campaigns out there, in one of the earliest, to showcase how important the internet could be to marketing, and how you could, making something viral could skyrocket your movie. So what they did is, one, well, let's come back to this one here. They essentially put out on the internet that this movie was real, based on real events, that this was missing footage found. And people were, I mean, I think you could argue that people aren't necessarily more savvy today on what's fake news, but people were more trusting of everything that got posted on the internet back in its early days. And so when this came out saying this was found footage, and then they had this convincing website that had what looked like artifacts found in the location. You could click on like this, basically different things about the journal, discovered objects, things like that. So they had this whole website that like was meant to be this idea of evidence found, and kind of making you a detective. It reminds me of like the popular detective games now, where like they send you boxes and you have to figure out the mystery. They kind of played it like this on the internet. So that this was all free, right? You go to the website and you explore this information, and people got really into it, believing that this was real, right? What they were posting, they made missing posters of the actors. They did not tell people that they were actors, and people assumed they weren't, because of course the style of how the film was shot also seemed to indicate that. So if we go look at, it was up before, of course it disappeared here. Let's watch, this is the Blair Witch trailer. And you can see how it makes it look like it's just shot on home video through the film. And that was the whole point of the style of film. Play.
I just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom and my mom. I am so sorry.
Oh, and it doesn't want to show. Let's try that again.
I just want to apologize to Mike's mom and Josh's mom.
Oh, it's this part's the dark part.
I am so sorry, because it is my fault. Because it was my project.
The search of the three missing Montgomery College students continues in Frederick County tonight.
10 days and thousands of man-hours have been unable to produce any clues.
We have a few leads, a few other options we want to take advantage of, and just try to put together some pieces to this puzzle.
Do you believe the occult may be involved in the disappearance of your son?
I am so scared.
So you see, I have the website on there for you to see at the end. But then Steve and I got confused. I watched a different one where they cut that first part out. So I was like, oh no, my stuff doesn't always work with the internet right away. But the idea with this was that they made it look like it was a news report, that they were interviewing people, that this was something real that happened, and then that what we were watching, what you were going to watch, was the found footage, almost like a documentary of this event. And people believed it. And then you tied that in with the website and the missing posters and the kind of viral spread of that website and this information and the early days of people posting about that, and it took off. And that like it set the stage for along with Independence Day and different type of marketing structure. And Independence Day definitely was like kind of the blueprint for blockbuster films. The Blair Witch was the blueprint for internet marketing. The next one that you can definitely see has borrows from Blair Witch, but also does their own thing, is Paranormal Activity, which started in 2007, but then continued this kind of long marketing campaign through 2009. But again, it's meant to be like a home surveillance camera. Again, trying to create it as that this is real, right? That this is real footage that you're seeing in the movie. And here's the. So yeah, this is why I was thinking that it was the other preview. So here's this preview for Paranormal Activity. Oh no, I got the circle of death. Hang on. Okay, so one of the things they're going to do is it is a little bit different because they're not going to go all out Blair Witch Project and try to convince everyone it's 100% real. Instead, they're talking about, right, the audience was the first to experience this, so they're trying to get you to feel like basically like major FOMO. I didn't get to see this. Look at their reaction. Look at how much it scared them, along with maybe it looks real. And I want to see this film, but it's not available, which we'll talk about in a second. So now how do I get to see it?
High def camera on. My girlfriend Katie, she thinks there's something in the house. I don't know.
You believe me, right?
I think we're gonna have a very interesting time capturing whatever paranormal phenomena is occurring or is not occurring. Windows are locked, doors are locked, alarm is on. Hearing a weird sound.
Something's here. I feel it breathing on me.
There's footsteps in, but there's no footsteps out.
Oh, God. Oh, my God.
If you do try to play games with it, that's inviting it in.
Jeez, looks like something big here.
It's not the house. It's me.
You cannot run from this, it will follow you.
I'm in control.
You're not in control.
What's happening to me?
This thing left a message.
If it's not a ghost, what is it?
Okay, so this last part where they're listing the small amount of theaters or cities that is coming to as part of their campaign that we'll look at. But again, now they did something different here with this was their trailer. They first showed the first viewing of it to show like how scary it was. And then they showed the movie, parts of the movie itself. So this is here, we're at C. So internet marketing, right? And this one we're looking at Paranormal Activity. So, and then they showcase the movie, but and the film, that's where it definitely has some qualities to the Blair Witch Project, because they made it look like it was a real, like this couple home filming that, right? And I certainly think that plays well in like the horror suspense genre, because if you believe it to be real, it's going to be more scary. And then people are going to it's going to create more interest in it. So what they did with this is that they had in October of 2007, which is what that first audience they were showing, they had a sneak preview of the film at Screamfest in LA, and this was the LA horror festival. Okay, so that's what they did first. And then, actually, I think that the one they're showing in there is the public screening. So that was the first time they showed it. Then in November of 2008, they had the public screening again, just in one studio in Santa Monica. So like a year, I mean, it wasn't a full year later, but so that's what they had. That they showed it, they made it something exclusive, and then they promoted it online, and specifically listed as they started adding locations. So what happens then is in 2009, Paramount starts building a campaign more actively, I guess. They're already doing it with the other stuff here, and they're creating interest for it. But this was a whole new concept, which they basically created this idea of demand it, is what they called it. And the idea was, if you want to see the film, then go to this website and click on demand it. Go to website and click demand it. And if enough people clicked on that, they would add theater locations based on interest. So it created, again, this kind of idea. Here's what it looked like. Here was part of the website, right? Your 100,000 demands gets location, and then they would put up different locations where then you could click on demand it. And the idea was like, this is limited and exclusive. Look at how other people responded. Look at what you're missing out. And so if you really want to see this film, then you're going to have to not just go here and demand it, but it almost was like they created this idea of early on of what this created was the idea of people promoting the film for them for free. Right? Because then they would try to get more people to click demand it, so they would post about it. They would post things trying to get other people to have interest in it. And it was insanely successful. So you go from 2009, where you had very limited release, the 12 screens, which is what they were showing at the end of the trailer, to, and that was on September 28th. You go then on October 16th. So to give you, so again, September 25th, there were 12 screens, right? Screenings, film locations of this. October 16th, it had moved up to 763, and by October 23rd, it was it was a little over 2,000 screenings, right? So, right, massive jump. And this ultimately, what this all led to was that it ended up grossing $194 million in cinema, and 14 million in DVD. Now, of course, if you go even more current films, you can look at films being billions and stuff like that. But like, this was insane for very little money. Very, very little money. They did not put a lot of money into marketing. They used the internet. They used psychology to get people to promote it for free. And then current techniques, there's just a few, there's some that have been added, of course, the big one being social media. With the continued not only advent, but increase in social media, you have TikTok, Facebook, although Facebook is waning on some of that, YouTube, Twitter. These all become popular ways of promoting a movie for free, and not just promoting a movie, right? It promotes a movie and it gets users to promote the movie for free as well. A good example of this is with Anchorman, and what they did with this, and it wasn't actually like Ron Burgundy or Will Ferrell, doing this, but the idea is that, and this was a relatively new thing. This doesn't even seem unusual now, but essentially that Ron Burgundy posted on Twitter, so people would follow because you got funny, witty messages from Ron Burgundy, right? And you know, I'm sure some people thought it was Will Ferrell posting, but even if they didn't, right? It was the idea that it was fun and a clever way. Come back here, I'll show you. So here's, you can go like search this and look and stuff, right? So it's the Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and there would be little clips that would be posted. And my internet's slow. Happy birthday, Will Ferrell. Well, if it isn't the competition. And yeah, my internet's slow. But it was just lots of posts, especially when the film was coming out, and right after, of Ron Burgundy as Anchorman, doing funny things, saying witty things that then engaged potential audience members into, I'm going to close out this one just because of stressing my internet. It engaged people to interact with it, and then they retweeted it, and other people retweeted it, and that's that social media aspect of going viral, with especially if you got the right tweet, that then everyone was talking about it. And if everyone's talking about your film, they're more likely to go to your film. And all of this was like, you know, very little cost in marketing. Hunger Games did one where they created a website, and what you could do is become a citizen of Pan Am, and you joined a district. And you got your own unique pass if you signed through Twitter or Facebook. So there was also some collaboration, or Facebook. There was some collaboration with Twitter and Facebook. But this was, again, another way of people going to the website, engaging. Harry Potter does this, where then you take the quiz and you get put into, you know, what group are you, with the sorting hat. Well, that's the same idea with that. All of that was that type of thing, where it's engaging the audience to engage on the internet and drum up interest, have people be invested in the movie, and that creates more views and almost obsession with the film. So then people are more likely to go more and more times. And then you have also YouTube channels became popular with this where you would have movie stars from the film promote on, you know, various channels that were just on YouTube. You had reaction videos, and this could be both of just random people reacting to the film, and they actually started having the stars do reaction videos. Google autocorrect was another one that they still do, right? So here's an example. This one is with Spider-Man, just with the new Spider-Man that came out, and they do a reaction.
What up, guys? This is our first day on the Spider-Man No Way Home press tour. We're about to watch the new trailer, which comes out soon. Ooh. I'm pretty excited.
Interesting.
All right, we ready?
Yeah, let's go.
I'm quite nervous, actually. Oh, I am double handsome.
Already.
Starting with
drama.
We only have 1 week.
Were you really in Times Square?
Or am I like
Yeah.
this?
We were on that bridge.
Do you remember how difficult that bridge was to land on?
When I kept landing and you landed in my lap.
Watch that spell. We wanted everyone to forget the Peter
Who's
Parker
Spider-Man?
Spider-Man.
Oh.
We started getting some visitors.
Oh, they
You show it.
No way.
That's cool.
Whoa.
Look at the suit.
Your suit was crazy in that one.
I love this one. It's going to be
So
like,
sick.
people are going to lose their minds.
Hello.
Whoa. Oh. When we did that, I just was running.
None of those
None of this cool stuff. I just ran.
What's your name again?
Dr. Otto Octavius.
No way. That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
I hope that's in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh no.
We need to send them back.
Oh.
So,
The suit looks sick.
The
The
suit
black and
looks
gold
really
suit
cool.
looks so cool.
Your mess. I know a couple magic
Wow, guys, we look really nice there.
Yeah, for sure.
Look at that light.
I know, for
Good
sure.
looking
Look at that light.
brains.
Seriously.
Sun kiss
Love it.
I love it.
this Christmas.
you're flying.
I've never had a Christmas movie.
Well, I do.
My God.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah, because it's always a summer movie.
It's always come out in June.
Right, right.
Nice.
Fate.
Get it?
Oh!
Don't.
Serious? Yeah, me too.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, now you guys are both. Oh,
Almost
that's
felt that
crazy.
one.
Yeah, that looked like it hurt.
It did, it was massive.
Universe.
Oh wow, that looks
That actually was really cool.
Oh, I like that they did the thing with Jamie's, the comic thing. No, that's hard.
Yeah,
that's
the gator. Whoa! Oh, that was so adorbs.
Where's the... This is all my fault. I can't save everyone. Yes, you can. You can save everyone.
Bro, do it, my guy.
You see the
wow. Oh my
With the
goodness,
stunts.
we got
With
that.
the stunts.
Woo, let's go. Woo, woo. People are gonna go crazy when they see that bit. Oh my goodness.
That was a little bit of a spoiler without being a spoiler. Anyway, like they're copying reaction videos that were popularized previously by just people watching films and reacting to trailers, to full films, to music videos, and then started having the actors react to the trailer of their film. And there's lots of other ones. There's tons of different things that they started having actors do in on YouTube to promote that, and it's again very cheap marketing that often is easy to go viral, to have future audience members pass, rewatch, write about, and the dissemination of information and hype and excitement for films is just massive with what you can do with the internet. But it's also why it's so important to look at like the earlier ones with the Blair Witch Project and what they started that hadn't been seen before, and how that shaped, and everyone else is like, oh, we can use this, right? So, you know, those kind of precursors. Independence Day was definitely like an early blockbuster film that shaped how other blockbuster films did things on these grand scale. Blair Witch Project shaped how internet marketing was often done, and then what we see kind of through today. All right, so that's where we're ending with film history. We'll be moving on to other topics after this, but that is kind of what we're covering for that. Again, there were tons of things that we could have also covered. You could spend a whole semester just on film history. We don't have that time, so this is what we're covering for it, but it hopefully gives you a good preview of the kind of different periods and how film changed, and ways of promoting the film, of how the movie stars versus directors throughout this three-part kind of series of four-part series now of how film changed over time, with new technology, with just trying different things, with what was going on socially. All of that impacted, you know, how film was made, what people wanted to see, and how studios influenced that. All right, we'll leave it at that.